Coming up on this week's RegCast.
We're taking certain things on safety and peace for granted. And then only by looking at the digital space, we suddenly realize there's front running, there's all kinds of fraud, things which are not completely prevented by MiFIR and similar regulation. Therefore, we need simple things like, for example, a golden source of reliable crypto or digital market data, trading venues and brokers, which is accepted by supervisory authorities.
So RegTech will for sure be part of this. I think it will be integrated into the services and the application of these assets, how they're traded. The RegTech will be part of the tech.
So there's the benefit of having a token and fully automated, is that you've just wiped out the entire paper process, fully automated it and made it transparent. Now, the token itself is not the issue. The question is, can a bad actor then get into the ecosystem and start owning these tokens and basically pushing bad money or bad assets around the ecosystem?
What RegTech does is help you thrive. What TradFi firms are not so good at is becoming digital. And that's exactly what digital asset firms are. That's that ability to reach out and touch on RegTech is a key differentiator that we think digital asset firms will be able to pick on.
Welcome to RegCast.
RegCast. Shining a light on challenges and opportunities for digital compliance.
Welcome to episode 5 of season 2 of RegCast. We've been looking at digital assets and there is an awful lot moving. We're getting ready for our April event on the 5th of April, and I'm really pleased to have a great cast here today to talk about some of the key issues related to the investor protection in the digital asset space. As a brief introduction, some people argue that digital assets don't need to be intermediated. You know, we don't need central entities, kind of like we have in the financial services system today. There's been a big pushback against that. Primarily, the BIS wrote a DeFi paper where it argued that some form of centralization is inevitable. And personally, I agree with that point of view. I see the decentralization really as an illusion, mainly because for the past 16 years, we've been sitting in the middle of large groups of market participants trying to work out these complicated rules. How do you prevent money laundering? How do you protect the customer? How do you get transparency to the market and manage risk and look at the computational integrity of all the data? That's not going to be done in a really decentralized way. And very often, when we're talking to folks in traditional finance or TradFi, they don't have the tooling for this today. Never mind think about putting it on the blockchain. So there's a big opportunity with digital assets to think about how to change the game. And that will then move the whole compliance RegTech question much closer to the front office than it sits today. It's not going to be like a back office tech and ops conversation, which I think is really healthy for the whole RegTech sector. So as we heard in the last episode, things are moving really fast from a regulatory point of view, not just in Europe, not just in Germany, in the US now and elsewhere. Things are becoming real, and this is coming to market. So I'd like to introduce our panelists without further ado, starting with Rudolf Siebel, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rudolf Siebel. I'm Managing Director at BVI, which is the German Asset Managers and Fund Managers Association. We represent 160 members based in Germany or active in Germany, managing 4.4 trillion in assets, mainly in securities. And our German law has preempted the EU law by allowing 20% of institutional fund assets to be invested specifically in digital assets in the form of native tokens, which would equate about 400 billion euros if fully invested. And that is why the association is fostering the possibility to invest in digital/tokenized assets going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian.
Hi all, I'm Brian Yeo. I am head of data governance and strategy at the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Abu Dhabi Global Market here in the UAE. That's a mouthful. What I do is I help look at how to build policy frameworks and infrastructure that support and grow the fintech ecosystem here in Abu Dhabi, including building out the crypto space.
Thank you very much. And Phil.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Phil Langton. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Securrency Capital, a digital broker that's being set up and licensed in Abu Dhabi Global Markets. And our goal is to take traditional trading and move it into the DeFi and blockchain space and try and create a marketplace for all things digital as we go forward.
Fantastic. Welcome. And last but not least, Charlie.
Thanks, PJ. I'm Charlie. I'm a crypto and digital assets lawyer. So I work for commercial entities, from protocols through exchanges, through wallets, through service providers, to startups and investors in startups that are building out new technology. I also work for trade bodies, regulators, and policymakers as we try and figure out how to do this.
Excellent. Well, you're a man in demand. So I'd like to start off with inviting the panelists to help shape the discussion for people from their particular point of view. I mean, the overarching question here is, how does RegTech help make investor protection safe? But to get there, I'd like to start with Rudi. And can we talk a bit, or can you comment on the shaping of the law that's already taken place that you just referred to in Germany, and what really that means from a data and technology point of view?
Yeah, I mean, we have in the EU coming up the MiCAR regulation, which will mimic MiFIR in terms of allowing for institutional safety in the full value chain of non-traditional finance assets, similar to the MiFIR and MiFID regulation already existing for financial instruments. In Germany, that has been partially copied, especially in the realm of digital assets custody, as well as digital assets fund issuance, and that is either in place or will be in place within the next 6 weeks. We also would hope that the EU regulation is coming forward. In specifically, what do we need then to do next? I mean, we have seen that not so much with the token themselves incidents have happened, but with the surrounding environment, i.e., unlike in MiFIR, a broker is not a broker, an exchange is not an exchange, a depository is not a depository. Nothing is like in MiFIR if it is not regulated. Therefore, we need simple things like, for example, a golden source of reliable crypto or digital market data, trading venues and brokers, which is accepted by supervisory authorities, i.e., where some background testing has happened and they make it on sort of on a whitelist approved by the regulators. The asset manager, but also their supervisory authorities, need due diligence tools in order to be able to assess the eligibility of digital asset. That would also require that we agree on certain identifiers, similar we have done in the traditional finance space, ideally based on ISO identifiers, like the digital token identifier in combination with the ISIN, because currently we have the problem that even BTC is an equity trading symbol on some exchanges. And we certainly, simply because it's on the blockchain, it doesn't mean that the so-called messaging, i.e. the transactions, don't need to be standardized. So a lot of information which is already prepared under standard setting bodies like FIX protocol or like ISO 20022 should be reduced so that we do not end up with a lot of privately run and privately defined blockchains, which would completely destroy the notion of interoperability for asset managers and their clients across the globe. And finally, obviously, the regulators, especially in a decentralized situation, would have to have digital tools available to them in order to do chain analytics on the executed transactions in order to be sure that the whole system is safe and sound. Now, I'm not an expert on AML or KYC, but certainly that needs to be integrated too from a data perspective. Thank you.
So in summary, you need to know what is being treated where as valid and trusted information, and you have to have the tools to be able to inspect it and know that it's safe.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and I really appreciate the point about the standards. There's really no difference, right? The standards to trade in the market just need to be put on a different technology.
Exactly. I mean, it's like we have to, in the TradFi issue, we have discussed moving from XML-based ISO 20022 to JSON-based in order to support API usage. And now we are simply have to move the same content, the same taxonomy, the same business dictionary, whatever the exact term is, to the digital finance, especially the blockchain space.
Yeah. And that's so important because we spent so much time defining the MiFID or the TradFi trading environment, and therefore we want to try to align the digital environment with the traditional environment and know that we have some commonality and that we have connectivity between the rails.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's about institutional trust. You have to be able to trust the system, and only by looking now at the digital finance system, we suddenly see how much of the regulation which we have in place in TradFi, which we all thought was more or less red tape, it's a little bit like, unfortunately, like Ukraine. We were taking certain things on safety and peace for granted, and then only by looking at the digital space, we suddenly realized there's front running, there's all kinds of fraud, things which are not completely prevented by MiFIR and similar regulation, but things which are at least reduced to an extent that overall the market feels safe. And I think that's important, and that needs to be supported, obviously, in a digital way, because we want to have a digital finance system and not something which is a hybrid between human interaction and digital.
Absolutely. Brian, let's come to you. I mean, some of this might be music to your ears, and I know you on the last RegCast you were on, you spent a lot of time talking about the overall approach, but what is how is RegTech going to help digital assets mature and be able to keep up with some of these issues that Rudi just mentioned? Absolutely.
So I think just as a quick summary and as a plug for ADGM, I think Rudi should take a look at our regulatory framework, because we treat virtual assets the same as we do TradFi, because fundamentally it doesn't change how financial services are it doesn't change what financial services are delivered, changes how they're delivered. Okay, but I'm going to answer your question about how RegTech matures by taking a quick step back and then 2 steps forward. First, I think one fundamental issue that we see about digital assets is that information acquisition is expensive, right? It takes time and effort to understand things. So that's why digital assets have not currently yet been well adopted, because they're too complex for the average user, right? But it's also why they're not been well regulated so far. It's been too complex for the regulator, and it's also been too complex for people who've been coming from a non-financial domain to understand how compliance works, how regulation works, right? So keep that in mind first. Information acquisition is really expensive. Now, a bit of backdrop is that we think that it's only a matter of time before you see more regulatory intervention happen in digital assets, even or maybe especially for things like DeFi, right? And we think that there are probably going to be 2 outcomes in this new regulated world. First, you will see firms that aren't willing to become compliant will face a very, very tough time in maintaining their business models, right? Because the types of regulation that we anticipate coming, like ML, TF, are quite fundamental. But the second is that even those digital asset folks who want to be compliant will need to ramp up quickly. They need to be able to understand how to comply, or even what the purpose of compliance is. And that's why we think RegTech is so important, because what RegTech does is it helps reduce the cost of understanding what it takes to become compliant, right? And it's even more important for digital asset folks than perhaps traditional finance folks, because it's in a related domain. It's tech, right? The concepts of tech and how it's used is a language that's adjacent to how digital asset firms work on. They can somewhat understand how RegTech can help make their processes better and more compliant. So I see it as a bridge that helps firms in the digital asset space ramp up quickly. And that's why we see RegTech as helping to mature digital assets.
Thank you. That's an excellent perspective. And I think one that we forget is TradFi. We understand that information isn't free and that there's a cost to bring it together. And I know actually the BVI has been at the forefront of trying to make it cheaper, more accessible. But even so, that's the heart of the market. If you don't have the information, you can't trade. Phil, let's come to you on this one. I guess there's a real important distinction there between who is doing the trading, and it kind of gets back to, well, how do we trust the wallets, and what do we put in them? What's your perspective on the RegTech implications there?
Yeah, look, I see multiple answers to this question depending on who you are. If you're in the tech space, then you're advocating the whole concept of automation, reduction in costs, solving problems, innovation, all of those things you would associate with this market, and all the reasons that you want to see things move onto the blockchain, removing manual interfaces, increased automated controls. So as a tech provider, and as a controller, you want all of those things. As a trader, I think it comes down to an age group bracket. I come from the age group. I've grown up with traditional finance. I don't confess to be a better trader than some of the managed funds out there. So I put a large proportion of my investments at my age group into managed funds or third parties to control. And I trust them. I come back to this point about I trust them to manage the funds, to custodize them, to own them. That is not today's youth. They're walking through into this space never having grown up with managed funds, and they don't want to be in a space where they utilize third parties. They want to own their own assets, manage their own assets, whether they believe they're invincible or whether they just believe they want to try things. They have a higher risk appetite, and therefore their view on innovation is completely different to mine. And that would change how much assets I put in a particular wallet, the amount I would trade through digitization, and also the risk class that I would potentially look to go into. So trust is a very strong word. I think it's one that resonates to regulators, to market participants, and also to traders. But I think you need to look at it in relation to who's doing it and what are they doing.
Very well put. And I guess that's trust not just with the customer, but it goes all the way up the value chain.
Yeah,
correct. Infrastructure, the whole process.
But the youth invests $5,000, and I'm talking about pension fund managers maybe investing $50 million, and therefore then trust whether what age group the pension fund manager is in takes a completely different notion.
I would agree, but then I would caveat one thing. Is it a pension fund manager is not in trading on the blockchain because the assets are not there? Bearing in mind it would lower their back office costs, it would automate their processing, it would increase the speed for settlement. So the rationale for trading is there. It's just they're not using it. Why is that?
A great question. Let's go to Charlie on this because he's been involved with a lot of the newer prototypes. What kind of levels of automation are you seeing from crypto digital assets that they in this space? And do you see a role for RegTech to push it forward?
Yeah, so I need to start with some definitions as well, I think, and just to describe the breadth of what we're talking about here. So the terminology that's used most often is the term crypto assets. But when we're talking about crypto assets, we're talking about both the native crypto tokens, so Bitcoin and Ethereum or Ether, the two best examples of that, but also where we talk about the digitalization of a traditional financial instrument. So a digital bond issuance, a fund structure that's got tokenized equity or digitalized equity in it. Both of those fall within the broad definition of crypto assets. So this is part of the difficulty of conversations like this and looking at it from a regulator's perspective and a tech provider's perspective is Crypto and digital assets isn't one thing. It's 20 or 30 things, and it's more things each day. From the legal perspective, we're generally looking at two different things: law and regulation. They maybe seem like the same thing, but if I take regulation first, in some ways that's easier. The regulator applies rules that are set by policymakers, and those define things like AML standards, requirements for licensing, and similar. So given what I said initially about the nature of crypto assets, it's unlikely that one size fits all, but often regulation is catching each of those types of assets by focusing on one asset, say focusing on the crypto native assets. Regulation can be impacting and restricting some innovation that can take place around digitalization of traditional assets. So it's important to see how the regulation applies specifically to the types of products and the types of assets that we're looking at. If we then look at law, so not the rules that are set by policymakers for application by financial regulators, but the broader principles that apply in the UK and US jurisdictions, common law principles relating to the nature of property, trusts, how ownership is held, managed, transferred, recorded. Those rules are being currently updated, but they haven't been updated yet. We still have some unanswered questions about the nature of property interests in certain crypto native assets. So it gives a sense of the challenges that we're dealing with. I think the short answer around RegTech is it's probably too early for RegTech to have broad solutions for us, because we're still working on questions of a fundamental nature, and we're building the first prototypes and we're building the first models in many of these cases. So where if I do a traditional bond, but as a digital bond issuance transaction, we're at the early stages of that. We're still working through the questions, and you can see the transactions that have been publicized in the market before are small transactions compared to the bond sizes that the issuers of digital bonds are themselves doing in a traditional way. So RegTech will for sure be part of this. I think it will be integrated into the services and the application of these assets, how they're traded. The RegTech will be part of the tech. But for now, we're still trying to work on the underlying questions around the nature of the assets, the regulation that applies, how it should apply, and what the business model means based on those things. And then we'll come with RegTech and solutions that will follow.
But isn't that all that more important than to have RegTech there from the beginning? So you can track what you thought the rules were and tokenize how you went about doing the business, because you know the rules are going to change, and you're going to have to maintain these assets as they go forward, right? They're not just for Christmas.
Yeah, again, I think it depends on the assets. So this point is sort of implicit in some of the previous comments, that if we talk about Bitcoin, one of the things that we are very conscious of working with it is there isn't a price for Bitcoin. So the price of Bitcoin depends on what exchange you're on at what point in the day. So there are some unfamiliar concepts in comparing native crypto assets to traditional assets, and that's the bit where the technology can help for sure. But there's a requirement for education in the market, because when we write documents around these transactions, we're valuing crypto assets by reference to averages of prices across exchanges, specified exchanges that can be put in or out of the definition depending on how things move and the liquidity on them. That is not wholly different to the way traditional assets have been viewed and valued, but this language doesn't exist in the legal precedent. So you've got to build the RegTech off the back of how the regulation and the legal agreements are being developed. So I agree with you, but there's a sequencing part to it too.
Brian, what's your perspective?
I just want to jump in on that, because 2 points I'd make. First, I was under the impression that MiFID or the NMS in the US allows you to have multiple prices for one security because it's traded on multiple trading venues at one time, I fail to see how this is any different from seeing the price of a Bitcoin on multiple exchanges, except that there's the exchanges may not necessarily be all in one list. The second thing that I would make is that those questions that I recognize that not every regulator and not every jurisdiction has answered those questions, but certainly some have taken the view that a digital security is a digital security, no matter what technology is used to issue that. So if it's a security, and it looks like one and it quacks like one, then treat it like one.
Rudi, do you have perspective on that?
Yeah, I would second that, because I mean, one thing I think Charlie was referring to is we currently see in Germany, and that's true for, I guess, other locations too, we see indeed very small tokenized bond issuance, usually by not household names. And then you are faced with the technology barrier, the regulatory and the educational barrier. On the other hand, we have seen the AIB bond, which is a highly rated issuer, using a traditional bond prospectus to minimize name risk, reputational risk, and legal risk. And the only thing people then need to do is familiarize themselves with the operational and technical issues of how to research the bond, how to invest in the bond, and then ultimately go down the full post-trade chain. And one of our members did that, and it was publicized, therefore I can mention it, and it took them about 14 days to build up a parallel infrastructure to integrate this tokenized bond into as a parallel string besides their traditional, I would say, Swift-based operational systems. And that shows clearly where the challenges are, and they could be indeed mitigated if you would have more traditional issuers using the traditional prospectus sort of and just taking the technology bit new. And we constantly pressure the Bundesbank and the German government to issue a Bund as a highly respected bond instrument in the marketplace globally, to allow people to familiarize themselves with the technology aspect and not being overwhelmed with everything.
So maybe just moving to the second question then, Phil, we can maybe start with you. What's your perspective on what you're hearing here on the panel from a new asset class point of view? How aggressive should one be about thinking about tokenizing compliance into the value chain and really understanding where the risk is from day one? Is that something you can build in later, or do you have to get it right as you go?
I think you definitely need to think about it up front and work out how you are going to be compliant in many different aspects. And I don't just mean from a regulatory perspective, but if we step back a second and say, talk about, what are the use cases for tokenized assets? Because we're talking about mainstream, securities here, which is one aspect. And I don't think mainstream securities will take off for the pension funds, etc., until you see liquidity migrate onto a chain. It's not that they're not a great asset class, it's just that they can buy it cheaper and in bigger bulk somewhere else. If you look at the benefits, of tokenization, and digitization, and start there and say, what are you trying to do and what are you trying to control? Then I think the answer to that question is yes. If I take private placement markets today, which are predominantly paper-based, and take somewhere between 28 to 30 days to complete a sale, I can automate all of those rules for the ownership of a private placement into a token. I can create all of those rules today as just a workflow in a smart contract in the digital space. And I could publicize that token, and anyone can come along and try and own that token, but they've got to complete the 30 steps online automatically before they can do it. So there's the benefit of having a token and fully automated, is that you've just wiped out the entire paper process, fully automated it and made it transparent. Now, the token itself is not the issue. The question is, can a bad actor then get into the ecosystem and start owning these tokens and basically pushing bad money or bad assets around the ecosystem? Because that's what you're trying to control. It's not the fact that the automation of the token or the entire process can't be done. It can. It's how do you control that the people that own it and manage it are not bad actors? And that's where I think we need to have some form of control in place. You know, whether it's regulatory, whether it's anti-money laundering, whether it's some form of registration to stop theft, all of those things are potential where bad actors can interject, and where I think RegTech is focused today and should focus today on trying to automate and assist in that process.
Fantastic, thank you. So certainly a lot for listeners to look forward to in the panels and the conference, because we'll learn a lot about that. Rudolph, what's your perspective about what people should be thinking about it coming to the conference and trying to understand what's happening with the legal scenario you laid out there with what's happening in Germany before the European Union?
Yeah, I think to make a negative point, I don't think that the conference is about to decide whether Bitcoin is a good asset or not. That is certainly not, and that's primarily on many newcomers to the field is the primary question. Unfortunately, we cannot resolve that, but we can resolve a little bit the potential ways going forward to allow, as Phil has mentioned, a fully digitalized environment, which is then a mixture of sort of legal documents and other things prepared beforehand, but then a fully automated process. And I think that's where the conference will add the value.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that just making it practical and real for people in TradFi to understand, okay, these are the kinds of challenges that we should be paying attention to now. Charles, let's go to you, and then we'll wrap up with Brian. What's people love to come to these conferences and ask lawyers questions because they're free, and of course that free advice is really valuable. So what kind of valuable advice are you going to be giving at the conference?
Well, people should bring their questions. Exactly that, PJ. There aren't so many opportunities for free advice, so bring the questions. And just to clarify on that point that Brian made before, so I think we're saying the same thing, that a security that's digitalized is still a security, but something that is digitalized and isn't a security isn't a security. So Bitcoin isn't a security.
That's why we need MiCA on the EU side to have the same protections we have on securities extended in a broadly general way towards non-securities or non-financial instruments in EU parlance.
So that's why when we built our regulatory framework, we split them into three main areas: virtual assets, so things like Bitcoin, private money; digital securities, which are digital securities; and fiat tokens, which are basically stablecoins representations, digital representations of money, but not necessarily issued by a government, potentially issued by a private sector, but still a reference of money. So with a conceptual framework like that, things get a lot easier.
Brian, I think you said it very well, but just sum it up for us. What should people come to the conference to hear from you?
So I think one of the things that they should come to hear about is why RegTech enables digital asset firms, first, to exist, and second, to thrive, right? First, I think the wave of regulation is going to pose an existential threat to a lot of digital asset firms, right? Business models are likely to be significantly affected once you start requiring, as we sensing in the wind, that the users of virtual assets or digital assets need to be identified. That's not something that's easily built into a technology, and that is potentially existential for digital asset firms. So that's the first thing. RegTech is an enabler of survival. The second is an enabler of thriving. So even if you're a far-sighted digital asset firm and you reach out and embrace regulation, you're at a disadvantage. And the reason you're at a disadvantage is because TradFi firms understand compliance. They may not understand digital assets, but they understand compliance very well. And they may be able to pick up digital assets information faster than you can pick up compliance knowledge. What RegTech does is help you thrive. What TradFi firms are not so good at is becoming digital. And that's exactly what digital asset firms are. That's that ability to reach out and touch on RegTech is a key differentiator that we think digital asset firms will be able to pick on. So insights like that.
Well, you said that extremely well. I'm going to have you write my marketing material. Phil, final word from you.
Yeah, I think people coming to this conference are going to learn an awful lot about the various different actors involved in this process. So we know there's control from regulators, we know there's legal aspects, we know there's investors, we know there's automation, and we know there's innovation. And I think people coming in here hear all about those things, and also how to make it safer for them as individuals to operate in this space.
Well, thank you all very, very much, gentlemen. Those are excellent perspectives. As I read it back, I hear Charlie saying there's lots of questions you should be coming asking about what the business is that you're doing. Rudi saying, well, we understand the way forward and where this is all going from a legal framework point of view. Brian talking about the existential threat that is in front of us from a digital asset firm, but also then the implications on TradFi. And Phil very nicely summarized the operational implications and how we need to be thinking about this now so we don't get caught short later on. So that is a great point to leave this on. I will thank you all very, very much for participating. Remind you the conference is on the 5th of April. You can find it on the JWG website, which you'll hear in a second. And if you want to find us on LinkedIn with the newsletter, just look for the RegTech newsletter from PJ. And you can join the 1,009 subscribers I've had the past 30 hours. Anyway, thanks very much, and I will talk to you again soon.
You can download the podcast via Spotify, Apple, and Google. But also, I'd encourage people to come to the JWG website, which, as hopefully you will know, is jwg-it.eu. Go to the Intelligence Hub and create your bespoke library. This is RegCast.
Shining a light on challenges and opportunities for digital compliance.